Nearly a third of lottery winners end up being bankrupt within 3 to 5 years of winning. Right? People who had won millions, sometimes tens of millions, they ended up back at nothing. And before you say, well, they probably just spent it on stupid stuff, here's the thing, right? These aren't reckless people by nature. They're regular people, lawyers, teachers, plumbers, who suddenly had more money than they'd ever had in their entire life. Now, if it was just down to personality or bad luck, you'd expect their odds of going broke to look the same as anyone else's, but they don't. It's predictably higher. And once you understand why, you're going to start to see the same pattern in your own business, because I see it in founders all the time. And I lived it myself for years as well. Because your relationship with money, right, what you believe you're allowed to have, what feels like too much, or what feels greedy, or what feels safe, all of that got set before you were old enough to really understand what money even was. Somewhere between the ages of 2 and 7 years old, even before you could do proper maths, all right, your brain had already decided how much money was okay for you to have. And I know that can sound a bit like an exaggeration, but it's actually how the brain develops. So your brain moves through different wave states as you grow up. As a baby, you're mostly in delta, which is basically the same state that adults are in during deep sleep. From about 2 to 6, you move into theta. And theta is what hypnotherapists use to access the subconscious mind. Because in theta, there's no filter, right? Whatever you're told or whatever you witness, it goes straight in. There's no critical thinking. There's no, hang on, is that actually true? It just gets absorbed as fact. And then from around the age of 6 or 7, you start shifting into alpha, which is more of a calm, aware state. And it's only really by adolescence that you reach beta, which is the fully critical, questioning, adult thinking state that most of us live in on a day-to-day basis when we're busy. So everything that happened to you, everything that you heard before about age 7, it went into your subconscious, completely unfiltered, with no fact-checking. All right, it just became how things are. It just became normal for you. And one of the biggest categories of stuff that goes in during that window is money and our money stories. Now, let me tell you my money story. Now, growing up, there were constant arguments in my house around money. If a light got left on, it was a huge big deal. The heating was always on the lowest possible setting that it could be. Money doesn't grow on trees was something that I heard regularly. And anyone who did have money got spoken about like there was something a bit off about them, like they weren't very nice people. Like having money meant that you'd become a certain type of person, and not in a good way. So by the time I was old enough to actually earn anything, my subconscious had already decided that money was scarce, that wanting more of it was a bit greedy, and that having it might actually change me into someone that people didn't like. So in the same way that water goes into soil without even trying, it just gets absorbed. That's what happens when you heard all of these money messages and stories when you were a child. You just absorbed it because you were there. Now, on top of my money stories, right, I was told that being a dog trainer, which was my first business, it wasn't a real way to make money, that it wasn't like a proper career. So I had two beliefs stacked on top of each other before I'd even started my business, that money is something to be wary of, and what I actually wanted to do wasn't going to pay anyway. Right? I was told to get a proper job, right? Work 9 to 5, work hard. It doesn't matter if I enjoyed my work or not. It's all about the money. So what happens when someone with beliefs like that gets given a lot of money very fast? It's the same thing that happens to lottery winners. Right now, your conscious mind is thrilled that you've won the lottery, all right? Or perhaps your business finally takes off, or you land that big client. Now, consciously, you want this, but your subconscious, the part that's running the show, and it's running about 90 to 95% of the time, depending which research you're reading, it never agreed to this, right? It's still running the old program that money is dangerous, that money changes you, that money isn't for people like us. And so your subconscious does what it always does when there's a mismatch. It tries to pull you back to what feels familiar, even when what's familiar objectively looks like less money, more stress, fewer options. So that's why lottery winners self-sabotage their way back to being broke or the way they were before. Not because they're bad with money in some general sense, but because broke is genuinely what their nervous system recognizes as safe. And as founders, we do exactly the same thing. All right. You don't necessarily bankrupt yourself in 5 years. You just quietly cap your prices below what you're worth. You quietly avoid putting yourself forward for those bigger opportunities, or perhaps you quietly find reasons why now isn't the right time to raise your prices. And it can feel like a strategy decision at the time, but what's actually happening is that your subconscious is pulling you back to a number that feels familiar for you. Now, I did this for years without realizing. I was so busy, but I was way too scared to raise my prices. I would rather have been busy. And I told myself it was about building a client base, about building experience, about being competitive on price, all logical sounding reasons. And some of it was true. But underneath it, the real reason I kept my prices low was that charging more felt unsafe. I didn't want to become the kind of person that I'd grown up hearing talked about not being very nice and being greedy. Now, it wasn't until I started working with a coach and doing proper subconscious work that any of my money stories actually shifted. Now, I already knew logically that I should charge more, all right, for years, and that knowledge changed absolutely nothing. What actually moved the needle in my business was going back into that subconscious programming directly and updating it at the level that it was actually stored, at the root cause. Now, once that shifted, raising my prices suddenly stopped feeling like so risky, right? It just felt like the next obvious step. I had the same business, I had the same skills, but I now had a completely different relationship to what I was allowed to charge for them. Now, I want to explain as well why this stuff feels so stubborn, even when you're aware of it. The beliefs that you picked up about money, they probably weren't even fully your parents' beliefs either. They likely inherited them as well from their parents, from whatever financial trauma or scarcity ran through the family before you were even born. Now, there's actual research now on this around epigenetics, showing that stress and trauma responses can be passed down biologically across generations, not just taught through behavior. So in a lot of cases, you're not even carrying your own fear around money. You're carrying someone else's that just got handed to you before you had any say in it. Now, this can honestly feel a bit weirdly freeing, right? Because it means that none of this is your personality or a character flaw. Not that you're bad with money or not cut out for big numbers. It's an inherited setting. But settings can be changed once you actually know that they're there. How do you actually change it? Now, the honest answer is the same way that it got installed. Repetition in a state where your subconscious will actually accept new information. And that's daily, consistent, deliberate work. All right, it's not a one-off pep talk before a big sales call. I see this with clients constantly. One I worked with did this daily repetition-based work specifically around her sense of worth. And she raised her package pricing significantly off the back of it because she had finally shifted her identity and she was now allowing herself to charge what she was worth. Another one of my clients, a designer, she raised her session pricing. And the bit that surprised her was that she didn't lose clients over it, which was something she was really worried about. She actually got more clients because when you're no longer unconsciously broadcasting, please don't think I'm too expensive, people stop questioning whether you're worth it, right? They just believe you because you believe you, and you end up attracting a different kind of client. So if any of this resonates, I want you to not try and think your way out of this money ceiling, right? You can't logic your way past something that was installed before you even had logic. But what you can do is start noticing where the old programming is running. Where do you go quiet about money? Right? Where do you discount before anyone's even asked? Where do you assume the answer is going to be no before you've even said the price out loud? Right, and that noticing is the first real step because you can't change what you can't see. Now, if you're resonating with this and recognizing your own version of the light switch or the money doesn't grow on trees story or whatever your version of it was, that's something that you can work through. And if you want help doing that properly, that's literally what I do with founders. There's a link to grab a call with me, no pressure, right? It's just a proper conversation about where it's actually showing up. I'll see you in the next video.